hello again. Do you know that there are many strange things beneath the waves? Oh, mysterious, magical, marvelous things. But you can't always believe everything you hear. For example, have you heard the tale of the lost city of Atlantis? It's about a whole island of people that live at the bottom of the ocean. How do you suppose they keep their hats on? And then there's a story of a fellow named Neptune who has a big long beard and rides a dolphin. And in Scotland, well, they say they have something called the Loch Ness Monster. It's supposed to be a big creature that lives in a lake. You know, I guess every watery place you can name it, some fantastic story to tell about itself. And here in the Big Harbour, we have our own special story. And it all began the day that Hank saw a mermaid. It was the morning work meeting, and the tugs were abuzz with the big news. A shipwreck had been found right on the bottom of the Big Harbour. Well, naturally, George was the first to give his advice. I have the longest tow line, he said, so I could lower it down and pull up the wreck. It's quite a large ship, said Foduck. His computer made a buzzing sound as he figured it out. I'd say it weighs over 60 tons. Emily thought they'd probably only bring up the most valuable things that remained on the wreck. Hank was very excited. Do you think there will be treasure? He said. Maybe it's a pirate ship, said Theodore. There used to be pirates around here. I saw pirates once, said Hank, on Willie's Island. I don't think there are pirates anymore, said Foduck. They were ghost pirates, continued Hank, and they were dancing a pirate dance and singing yo, yo, yo. That's yo, ho, ho, said George. The tugs smiled at each other. They were used to Hank's tall tales. Then they all talked about what other things might be down there in the very deepest, darkest part of the Big Harbour. We are going to try and raise the old wreck, interrupted the dispatcher. Then he told them that the Great Ocean Tug and Salvage Company were going to use a barge with special equipment to pull it up. And Hank was given the job of moving the special barge to the wreck site. Hank and Theodore turned to each other with the biggest, widest smiles. They would go together and see the whole thing. Just think, Hank, said Theodore. The ship sank a long, long time ago, and nobody has seen it since. What kind of ship do you think it is? Said Hank. Oh, probably a Viking ship, replied Theodore. Viking? Repeated Hank. Sure, said Theodore. Everyone knows that the Vikings were sailors who visited here 1,000 years ago. Theodore began to dream out loud. I'll help bring the ship up and be famous. Maybe it'll even help me get my V word, Theodore the Viking. Hank and Theodore found the barge whose name was Bonavista, waiting patiently for them at the dock. Is it a Viking ship, Bonavista? Asked Hank. Probably an old sailing ship, replied Bonavista Barge. Vikings never came to this harbor. Of course not, said Theodore to Hank. Everyone knows that. The tugs arrived at the site of the sunken ship with Bonavista. They were looking forward to helping out and being the first to see the old wreck. But Bonavista said that she could handle the job just fine. She thanked the tugs, and they turned and headed sadly for home. That night, a storm was blowing in. Couldn't sleep. They were all thinking about the shipwreck. Bonavista's out there right now, said Theodore, bringing her up. 412 fathoms deep, said Foduck. Who knows what he'll find down there? Emily remembered a tale about a giant octopus who lived in a deep, dark hole in the bottom of the ocean. George had heard stories of strange fish all covered with electric lights like Christmas trees, but flat as pancakes with eyes attached to long strings of spaghetti. What could be down there, lying quietly for so long beneath the sea? All shivered. I know, said Hank, startling the other tugs. A giant lobster with a nose like an elephant. I saw one once. Yes, and I see a tiny tug with a nose like Pinocchio, said Emily. Everyone had a good laugh about that. The wind began to blow harder. We better tie down, said Foduck. Feels like there's a big storm coming. One by one, the tugs tied themselves safely to the dock and pressed in close to each other. They were still thinking about what might be down there, in the very deepest, darkest part of the Big Harbour. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with only a few crumbly clouds left over from the night storm. Hank was already up and hurrying out to the shipwreck site where he found Theodore. They smiled excited smiles to each other. They were both thinking the same thing. They couldn't wait to see what the barge had brought up. Bonavista barge was just waking up. Some pieces of the old shipwreck had been raised to her deck. "What did you find?" asked Theodore. "Was there treasure?" said Hank. "Giant octopuses?" The barge told the tugs that as she was raising part of the old ship, the storm blew a special piece back into the water. "What piece?" asked Hank. But just as the barge was about to say, the tugs heard Petra the pilot boat whistle for them. That meant it was time to go to work. "You better get going," said Bonavista. Hank and Theodore floated off, more curious than ever about the shipwreck. When Hank had finished his work, he decided to see what interesting things had washed up on the shore from the storm. There was an old yellow bottle, a good crab claw, a piece of driftwood that looked like a cow, and a mermaid, and a bunch of green seaweed, and a mermaid. Well, Hank couldn't believe his eyes. He looked again as hard as he could. And sure enough, there, swimming just beneath the waves, was a mermaid. Oh, she wore a beautiful red dress and had long, flowing green hair. The other tugs were resting at the great ocean dock when Hank came racing up all out of breath. I saw her, he was shouting. "She had a red dress and green hair." "Who?" said Theodore. Hank was talking so fast the tugs couldn't understand a word he was saying. A mermaid, shouted Hank. "I saw a real mermaid." The other tugs followed Hank as he led them to the shore where he had seen the mermaid. "She was waving to me," Hank was saying. "And I think she was singing, too." "Was she singing yo, yo, yo?" asked George. "Mermaids are supposed to be half human and half fish," said Fudak, who knew a little about mermaids. "Maybe she was living in the old shipwreck," said Emily, "and now she's looking for a new home." The tugs slowed down. They were getting near the shore. "Hank," said Theodore, "maybe you better go and see where she is." Hank set out for the shore, alone. His anchor was rattling just a little. He hoped his mermaid was friendly. But when he arrived at the place he had seen the mermaid, she was gone. The other tugs were just watching and waiting. Finally, they floated over. "She was right here," said Hank. "I saw her." "She probably went dancing with the ghost pirates," said George. "Hank, you're always telling stories," said Theodore, and he set off for home. The other tugs followed behind, leaving Hank staring at the spot where the mermaid had been. "Where did she go?" he said to himself. "I know I saw her." Finally, Hank turned for home as well. Then, he slowly turned back towards the shore. And there was the mermaid. "Hey, everybody!" shouted Hank to the tugs. The mermaid came back!" But the tugs continued on their way, for no one believed Hank anymore. When Hank turned back to the mermaid, she was gone again. Now that was the strangest thing, he thought. He drifted along, saying to himself, "I know I saw her. I know I saw her." Just then, a quiet voice startled him. "Hello, Hank." But it wasn't a mermaid. It was Bonavista barge. Hank had drifted all the way to the shipwreck site. "How do you like these old ship pieces?" said Bonavista. More pieces of the old shipwreck had been raised. They were sitting proudly on Bonavista's deck. "Great," said Hank, hardly glancing at the marvelous sight. "I'm still missing that important piece the storm blew overboard," said Bonavista. "It's a wooden statue that goes right up front. It's called a figurehead. It looks like a lady." Hank still wasn't paying attention. "What's the matter?" said Bonavista. "Oh, nothing," replied Hank. Bonavista called Hank's name again. She wanted to know if Hank had seen anything strange floating in the water. Hank gulped nervously and said, "Oh, just a mermaid, but no one believes me. Maybe I guess I make up a lot of things." "What did she look like?" asked the barge. "She had a red dress and green hair," said Hank. And much to his surprise, Bonavista wanted Hank to show her, and right away. "Oh, dear," said Hank to himself as he set off with Bonavista. He certainly hoped that mermaid was there this time. Soon they arrived at the place where Hank had seen the mermaid. "Sometimes she's there," said Hank. "Sometimes she... But mostly," said Hank softly, "she isn't." There was no mermaid to be seen this time. Hank began to turn around with Bonavista. "Stop!" called Bonavista suddenly. Hank stopped and slowly turned again toward the shore where Bonavista was looking. And there, floating just beneath the waves, a mermaid. "See, Bonavista, a mermaid!" shouted Hank. "I knew I saw her, a real live mermaid!" Bonavista barge smiled. She explained to Hank that what looked like the mermaid was really the old ship's figurehead, the carved wooden statue of a woman that she had been looking for. Sailing ships sometimes put them on their bows for good luck. And then Hank saw that her green hair was really seaweed. The tide was carrying the statue out to sea again. "That's why you can see her sometimes, and sometimes not," said Bonavista. "The tide was taking her in and out." Well, Hank was very disappointed. So it wasn't a real mermaid after all. "Now no one will ever believe me again," he said. But Bonavista had an idea. That afternoon, the tugs were gathered at the great ocean dock when they heard Hank's familiar toot-toot. They all turned around to see a wondrous sight. Hank was pulling Bonavista barge with some of the old shipwreck, but the most incredible sight of all was right there on Hank's bow. "A mermaid!" shouted Photo. "In a red dress," said Emily. "With green hair," added George. "Hank was right all along," said Theodore. The tugboats formed a grand parade behind Hank and the mermaid as they made their way into the harbor, tooting their horns all the while. And what a sight that was. And they all heard Hank singing, "Yo, yo, yo." Well, the tugs certainly were surprised to see Hank with that mermaid, but not nearly as surprised as the time he told them about riding a giant flying fish. He said that he caught it with his anchor. It's like a giant lasso, and that he was going to bring it in and put it in a corral, and that... Well, that does sound like a fishy story for another time. Thanks for visiting here in the Big Harbor. We'll see you all again next time. Oh, be sure to keep a sharp lookout if you're out to sea, or even if you're walking down the street. Because you never know. You never know. So,
Theodore, he's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat. A friendly tugboat. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world, there's so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done.